PNR Networks is a member of Patreon. Show your love for our shows by joining our ongoing fundraising campaign and get some fantastic perks in return. Check it out and become a Patreon sponsor. You can sign up at patreon.com, patreon.com/PNR Networks. And thanks for your support.
This podcast is a member of the Blueberry Network. Blueberry. No E's. That's Blueberry, BLUBRRY.com. Blueberry.com.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
It's Kim versus TC in the battle of the lists.
My list is better.
My list is better.
My list is better.
No, it's not. My list is better.
Kim or TC, who has the better list? From Subject Cinema, this is Front Row 5 and 10 with Kim Brown and TC Kirkham.
Hi everybody, welcome to another week here on Front Row 5 and 10, brought to you by the good folks that bring you Subject Cinema. That would be me and him, the me being Kim Brown.
Him being TC Kirkham, and it has been a hell of a 2-week period for us, so sorry we've been away. This has been missing. Subject Cinema's Drive-In Summer has been missing. But we're back saluting the July 4th holiday.
I've been missing.
Yeah, she's been missing. We've both been hella sick the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I caught a very bad cold from work, and it's...
Then she gave it to me.
Yeah, sorry.
Or we think she gave it to me. I might have gotten it somewhere else.
You might have got it at work, too.
I wasn't nearly as sick as you were.
No.
But in any case, it is July 4th if you're listening day and date. If not, that's cool. It's still an easy, great way to celebrate. And we're back with the list that I picked this time.
You did?
Now, Subject Cinema presents Front Row 5 and 10. It's going away until fall. This is our last show. Mm-hmm. We'll have more information on our summer replacement show a little bit later on because it's premiering later this week. So we'll talk to you about in our normal time slot. So hopefully, we'll talk to you a little bit about that. But in the meantime, if you'd like to contribute a list and try and get on and get a prize, we'll be collecting them all summer long. You can still write to us at frontrow@PNRNetworks.com. And hopefully somebody will contribute ideas for lists.
That would be nice.
It would be great. This week, Top 10 Screaming Yellow Zonkers. Screaming 70s Zonkers, excuse me. Mm-hmm. It came from the Screaming Yellow Zonkers, which was a popular snack in the early 70s. My idea was this. What 10 songs, when you hear them, automatically make you think something about the 1970s?
Yep.
Now, we realize a lot of our audience wasn't born until later than that. You lucky kids, you. But we had a lot of fun doing this, and to
those of you who would like to say, well, I wasn't born in the 1970s, or like the previous, shut up. We don't want to hear it.
Oh, now, tut. We can hear it fine. As long as they have respect for the music of the 70s, we don't mind if they are born in the 90s or the 2000s, or the 80s. Their loss for not being born early enough. But in any case, what we've done is we've listed. I actually have 4 runners up, and I have a tie in my top 10, so I have 15 songs total, which is not bad because when I started this list, there were almost 200 songs on the list, and it's been so hard because I had to cull them down into things honest top 10 that whenever I hear them, all I think of is something from the 1970s.
Yep.
What about you? How did you come about this? Because you are not as 70s music oriented as I am.
Well, what I did was I thought of my list and I was like, anytime I can think of a song and think to myself, I remember being a kid and hearing this song.
I remember the Bad Fashions.
I remember being a young person sitting in the car, listening to this song. I remember this song being on the radio when my dad would be out washing the car with us or stuff like that. Or, remember sitting on Revere Beach, like at the banana boat, getting ice cream or stuff like that. And, that kind
Does
of
Does each
deal.
song bring up a specific memory?
Not specific. One of them does.
Several of mine do, but most of them are generic. Before we get started, let me do the 4 songs that I included because I wanted to bring them up because I couldn't not bring them up. And they were all in the top 10 at one point, and then I dropped them because I thought of something else that really deserved to be up there. So my 14 through 11 official positions are as follows. And by the way, all of the songs from my list, and probably most from hers, I haven't seen her list yet, will be available on a Spotify playlist that will be posted with the show. You should find it right below the show links. And if you are a member of another service, Amazon or iTunes or whatever, and you'd care to put together the same song list and then send us a link, we'll be glad to post it for you. So people who listen to other things besides Spotify, and why you'd want to, I don't know, because Spotify is the greatest service out there, then we'll post those too. My runners up at 14 through 11, and these were all in the top 10 at one point. So this is going to give you an idea as to where my mind is going. Number 14, Love Will Keep Us Together, Captain and Tennille, 1975. Number 13, Silly Love Songs, Wings, number 1 song of 1976. Number 12, and you can't not have this and mention this, Afternoon Delight, Starland Vocal Band. Everybody knows that song. And at number 11, Love to Love You Baby by Donna Summer. Could not have a not have a Donna Summer song mentioned somewhere.
No, you really can't.
Because, she was quintessential late 70s. My top 10, I have 11 songs in because I have a tie at one of them because they bring up the same memory. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's go. Number 10.
My number 10 is You're So Vain by Carly Simon.
I hadn't thought of that one.
Now,
that was probably down on the list somewhere.
When I was a girl, which is a phrase that's going to be said a lot.
When I was a girl.
Notice I don't say when I was a little girl.
Right.
I have never been a little anything. I have always been Zaftig my whole life.
Oh, stop.
I have. But I remember hearing this song, and I remember being like, what does vain mean? I didn't really... That's how young I was when I first heard this song.
Right.
I didn't know what that meant. Mm-hmm. I had to ask my mom. And my mom's like, it means someone that's very proud and they love themselves. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I listened to the song, and I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, oh, okay. And I remember thinking, wow, she really doesn't like this person that she wrote this song about. Never occurred to me, like I said, little tiny child from the suburbs, that, this was someone that was in a relationship that had gotten burned. Right. And there have been speculations out the
It's Warren Beatty.
It's Warren Beatty.
It's Warren Beatty.
We all know it's Warren Beatty.
Carly's pretty much admitted that in her autobiography a few years ago. Yeah. Not without saying it, but she kind of did.
Yeah. So, my number 10, You're So Vain by Carly Simon.
That's a great choice, and I was, probably on my list, so I haven't gone through the whole 200 list here to look at it, but that's a good one. My number 10 is a song that evokes the memories of my mother going, oh my God, what is that? When she first heard it on the radio. Because it's so offbeat and so weird. And now today's generation know it. Thanks to Guardians of the Galaxy. My number 10, Blue Swedes, Hooked on a Feeling. You can't miss the beginning. Ooga chaka, ooga, ooga. My mother freaked out when she first heard that. What is that? That's shit. Blah, 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 blah.
Your mom, the music critic.
Well, my mom has great taste in music most of the time, but she didn't get any of the modern stuff that her, preteen son was listening to in the early 70s. And that was a number 1 hit. And I remember everybody in my school, we would run around doing that song because it was so popular. And it's like, it was just it was a hit a few years earlier than that by B.J. Thomas. You'd never know. It's a completely different song. Mm-hmm. You'd never realize it's the same song. Now Guardians of the Galaxy has made it a household name again, and people are remembering this song. And I really like that, and I think it's a lot of fun. It comes from 1974, and It's just a cool. I just have great school memories of that song and my mom. Number 10, "Hooked on a Feeling" by Blue Swede.
Okay. My number 9 is probably going to surprise some people because I have mentioned numerous times. It's very strange. Growing up in the Boston area in the 70s was a rather odd thing. No, it was. Because you had a very large disco station up here. Kiss 108 was the local disco station. And they advertised on TV and the radio and print and everywhere. And yet nobody that I knew listened to disco. All the teenagers I knew hated disco. They were all the older
You've
brothers.
You've been waiting for this, haven't you? Your chance to bash on disco.
No, I'm not bashing on disco. I'm just saying it was a very curious thing.
Okay.
Because disco seemed to be so popular in the city proper, but out in the suburbs, it was all disco sucks, and all that whole kind of sneering attitude. And yet here my number 9 is a disco song. My number 9 is "I Will Survive" by Gloria Gaynor.
I think that gets a second. That gets a pass because it became an anthem.
It did. It's a very powerful anthem, and it's a very positive anthem. The whole idea of a woman that's been through a very bad breakup, and this guy comes back thinking that he's just gonna worm his way back into her life, and she's like,
slaps him down hard.
GTFO, and I think, and I'm like, yeah, and I really love it. I think it's a great song. I still think it's a great song. So my number 9, "I Will Survive," Gloria Gaynor.
It's still used in movies all the time.
Yeah.
So it became a one of those. I mean, out of the disco era, there's very few songs you hear over and over again, even now, and that's one of them.
They use it now in an Avon commercial. They've changed the lyrics, but the tune is "I Will Survive."
Yeah. My number 9 is a song I loathe.
Alrighty then. This will be fun.
I love the artist. A lot of the stuff that the artist does, I adore. But this song is quintessential to me because whenever I hear it, you can't help but think of the 70s because of the imagery in the song, who's singing it. Mm-hmm. It came out in that kind of iffy period when disco was starting to go crazy, but wasn't yet the monster it would become a couple years later.
All right.
And it was on the radio. I mean, even when I was growing up, if you've ever looked at my music site, the Kirkham Report, I have this thing called the Radiography, which is pretty much all the stations I've listened to and why over the years of my life. And I'd love you to go check it out. But this song played on middle-of-the-road radio, it played on top 40 radio, it played on heavy metal radio. You couldn't get away from this song every time you turned the dial. It would be on no matter what station you turned it to. It's like the freaking Law and Order of its day. You can't get away from Law and Order no matter what channel you turn to on TV, and you can't get away from Benny and the Jets by Elton John no matter how hard you try. Never been a fan of that song, but it's, again, another one from 1974, and it's like, I remember living in this small town in Ohio. My mom and my stepdad and I, when we wanted to do something and we didn't have anything to do, we'd just go out for a drive. You could do that back then. Gas wasn't that expensive, even though there was an energy crisis on later. At this particular time, there wasn't that much. And we would just get in the car and drive for hours, just drive around and go see the countryside. And this song was always playing. And you'd turn the channel, and the song would be playing again. And you'd turn the channel, and there it would be again. It's like, the parasite of Elton John songs. Now, he did a ton of better songs in the 70s. Rocket Man, Tiny Dancer, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and dozens of other ones. But for some reason, this is still his fan favorites, the most favorite of all the songs that he does from all his fans, too.
Really?
And I'm like, ugh. Number 9, Benny and the Jets, screaming 70s zonker.
All right. My number 8 is a song from the 70s that I remember from the 70s and will always make me think of the 70s, kind of.
Okay.
It will also make me think of the 80s, but that's on a different level.
Okay.
My number 8, and you brought her up already, and you can't have a list from the 70s without talking about the Queen of Disco. My number 8 is Hot Stuff from the late, great Donna Summer.
She hated that title, by the way, but I actually worked with her cousin for several months.
Oh, yeah, you did. That's right, yeah.
Donna Summer could do no wrong when I was a kid. Loved her stuff. Still do.
Hot Stuff is one of those songs that I don't care if you're a rocker or a disco person or into folk music. You could be into clog dancing. You hear Hot Stuff, you're going to move your body. It's just one of those driving, primal songs that just makes you want to get up and move.
Hot Stuff was considered a rock song by most disco fans. They thought she was selling out.
Really?
Which I thought was interesting because, it ended up being one of her biggest hits, but it's like...
It makes you want to move, and it makes you want to dance. And by dance, I mean...
Great song.
And by dance, I mean strip. It's... it is one of the funniest... It's in the trailer for the British comedy, The Full Monty, when the men are in an unemployment line and the song comes on and they start kind of subconsciously dancing to the music. And you got to admit, if you're going to go up there and do the old bump and grind, it's the perfect kind of a song for that. For me, on a different level, and again, showing my age, but what the heck, this harkens back, for me, to a time back when... there was more pro wrestling to watch on TV.
Yeah.
When I say more, I mean more choice. Different feds. Yeah. And you could see, and then the wrestlers also used to use what I refer to as
proper music.
As in somebody else's actual song, not something written for them.
Who used Hot Stuff?
The late Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert.
Okay.
Used this song. Mm-hmm. And when I think of this song, I do think of him.
Yeah.
And it makes me smile. And it makes me smile when I think of this song because it's just a great song. It's just...
See, disco isn't that bad.
I never had a problem with the disco music. It was the disco attitude.
Yeah, but you've always bashed the music till I pointed that out to you. And then you realized the music wasn't that bad.
Yeah, I did. No, you opened my...
It isn't. The music's great.
You opened my ears to that, and I do appreciate that. So my number 8, Hot Stuff from Donna Summer.
From Donna's best album, Bad Girls. A fantastic album. If you've never heard of it, you should.
I used to listen. Awesome. That always used to play when I was at the skating rink.
Hot Stuff and Bad Girls?
Bad Girls. Bad Girls always used to play when I would go to the skating rink and attempt to skate. It's something
I've been twice in my entire life, not ever doing that again.
Ever.
My number 8 could only have happened in the 1970s because there's no way you would have this. Back in the 70s, the country of Jamaica had a rule that if you did something or you worked in Jamaica and you were an out-of-country person from like the UK, United States, Mexico, wherever, the money you earned there had to be spent in that country.
Is that still...
I don't know. I might be wrong. It might not be Jamaica. It might be Bermuda. It's one of the islands off the coast. One of the Caribbean islands.
Right, yeah.
So, the person went down there for some work. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Know what I mean? And found this out. And she was like, well, what am I going to do with this? Well, she took that money that she earned from that job in that country and put it into a recording studio.
That's
and
a
turned
job.
Out
Be nice.
It is.
It's
yes.
a job.
It is. Put it in the recording studio and ended up recording what became.
How you fill it out on your W-9.
And ended up recording what became one of the true disco anthems of the 70s. I'm talking about porn star Andrea True and the Andrea True Connection and More from 1976. This song you can't get rid of it. It pops up in movie after movie after movie and commercial because it's just so... You can relate it to the chorus can be related to a whole bunch of stuff if you don't listen to the lyrics. If you listen to the lyrics, the whole song, you know it has to be about sex. But the rest of it, if you just get the chorus... You can use it for cookies. You can use it for popcorn. You can use it for anything. And that's why it's become such a hot thing to use for commercials. Andrea passed away a couple years ago, sadly, at the age of 60, and I'm like, wow, I couldn't even find the original for the Spotify. I had to grab the re-recording, which I don't like as well as I like the original, but it's still good. And this song just screams to me my first summer in Harrington, when I lived in Harrington, Washington, when I was in my junior high and high school years, and music was my refuge, and this was one of the biggest hits that summer, along with the aforementioned runner-up Afternoon Delight and Silly Love Songs and all those. They were all popular at the same time. And it's just a great, great song. And I remember listening to Casey Kasem, Count Him Down every week. Has great memories, and it just screams 1970s. You couldn't do this song in the 80s or 90s. No. You could Kylie Minogue did have a remake hit with it in the 2000s, but it wasn't a hit here. It was hit around the world, but not in America.
I remember singing that song.
And it was good. It was a really good job.
I remember kind of walking around the house and just what you do when you're a kid.
Yeah.
You hear something on the radio and you just sort of la 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 along with it. I do remember my mom kind of looking and giving me this kind of a, what did you just say? kind of a, look.
Well, I was only in my early teens, and my mom never really commented on it. I'm sure she probably knew what it was. Number 8.
I'm sure my mom didn't, but I'm just sure that the lyrics just probably had her going, what?
That's what I mean. My mom heard the lyrics and we're like, whoa, that's probably interesting. Number 8, from 1976, The Andrea True Connection, and More, More, More.
Okay. My number 7 is a song that I heard a lot in the 70s, and it's just one of those songs that I think of. If I hear this song, even today, I just remember being a kid in the car, eating French fries and with the window down.
Right.
And, my number 7 is Hall & Oates' Sarah Smile.
I knew that's what she was going to say. She always brings that song up when we talk about 70s music.
Yeah. It's just one of those songs that I just remember being a little kid. It just puts me in a very small place in my head. Mm-hmm. I just remember being a young kid.
Same time, too. 76. Summer 76.
And just, it just puts you at that time when you don't, you don't have any worries, really. You don't really have any. You shouldn't, anyway, at that age. You should be young and carefree.
I just realized something as we're talking.
What?
Summer of 76 was 41 years ago. I feel so old now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and shut up. So, it's just a very pretty song. I better grab
my cane and start talking like an old man here. Oh, anyway, go ahead. Sorry. What?
Stop it. It's just a very pretty song. It's got kind of like a melancholiness to it. It's just very sweet. So my number 7, Sarah Smile from Hall & Oates.
If you've never heard of it...
I can't believe that.
No. Let me finish. There is a terrific cover version of Sarah Smile by a guy named Natasha's Brother that came out in the late 80s, early 90s. He only had one hit. It was a minor hit from a movie. But the album it came from, which I found in Cutout Bin, is filled with great music. And that was one of them. His cover of Sarah Smile blew my mind. Mm-hmm. Great stuff. My number 7, I had to pick something by this group simply because this group is one of those icons of the 1970s. Whenever you think of this group, you think of the 70s to me. Because that's when they had hits in the 80s too, but it's like, I've loved them, always loved them, although I've never been that interested in seeing them live, strangely enough. But I had a lot of their records. I just thought they were awesome. And I had to pick out one song. And the one that jumps out at me most is the one that was out in 1977. It was a number 1 hit. And I remember that year because we were always would play on the radio whenever my mom would be and I would be driving back and forth from in Harrington or like to Ritzville to see the movies or go shopping or something. It would always be on the radio. And it took me the longest time to figure out the lyrics. Because it's just so... it's a great song, and if you sit down and listen to it, you'll realize that's what they're saying. But Stevie Nicks has this uncanny way of...
That warbling thing. That
mushing her words. Yeah. But Fleetwood Mac's Dreams from 1977 is my all-time favorite song by them. I just heard a great acoustic version that was recorded. You can find a small YouTube clip of it by a group called Sons of Midnight, who were led at the time by singer Conrad Sewell, who is just one of my favorite artists right now. And his voice, I swear to God, you'd swear it was Stevie Nicks singing this song. His voice is that close to her. And it's like, wow. And they did it a cappella for the most part. Mm-hmm. And it's really something. But that song, I like Rhiannon, I like Go Your Own Way, I like all their big hits of the 70s, but
Right.
Dreams is the one that really pops out because that 77 time frame, you'll hear that date a lot in the next next few minutes, 77, 78. You're going to hear a lot of that from this point on. It's just a great song, and I always think of, the 70s and being a young teenager and just getting into music and girls and a number of other things. Dreams, Fleetwood Mac, number 7.
Okay. My number 6 is just one of those songs. I couldn't tell you the very first time I heard it, but it was just one of those things when you hear it, you instantly think of the 70s because I'd never heard keyboards like this until the 1970s. I mean, I know there were songs out there with keyboards in them before the 70s.
The 70s was a keyboard era. There were some organ keyboards in the late 60s, but the electric keyboards really took off in the 70s.
The keyboard work and the horns work on this song, I'd never heard anything like it before. My number 6 is Superstition from Stevie Wonder.
That was real close to my top 10, too.
This is such a great song. It's so, what's the word I want? Rich. It's such a rich
It's
song.
Stevie Wonder's best song.
So,
it always will be.
Well, I don't know if it's his best
I
song.
think it is. It's
I
my
love
favorite of all his
Stevie
stuff.
Wonder's a wonderful artist. I love this song. I love My Sharia Moore. I absolutely adore Isn't She Lovely? Because that's such a deeply personal
Jake
song.
Simpson's cover of Isn't She Lovely is awesome from Star Search. He was terrific.
That's such a deeply personal song, but Superstition, it's just so varied. I mean, it's such a nuanced and layered song. And I was very young when I first heard it, and I remember being like, what is this? This is just, I've never heard anything like this before. I want more. Where can I have some more? And it's just, Stevie Wonder's voice is astounding.
Oh, Stevie Wonder was amazing. He hasn't done a lot of recording in the last 10 years or so. He's done like maybe 2 major projects, but couldn't get away from him in the 70s and 80s, and you didn't really want to because he always came up with something. Sir Duke is one of my favorite songs of all time. Love that.
It's just such a fantastic song, and it's just, every time you hear it, you hear something you didn't hear the time before.
Yeah.
Even now. If I heard it now, I'd hear something that I didn't hear the last time. So my number 6, Stevie Wonder's Superstition.
I think that's the most covered song possibly so far on your list.
Maybe.
Because I've heard so many different people try that, and only one other person has been able to catch that almost as good as Stevie Wonder, and it's not somebody you would expect. It's country singer Hunter Hayes. He does a rock-out version of that song. Unbelievable. My number 6 is a tie, and the reason it's a tie is both of these songs have the same memories for me, and they're happy memories for the most part. From the fall of 1975 until March of 1976, I lived on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. I lived way out in the boonies, and I had to go to school in Gig Harbor. This was a bus trip that took almost an hour and 10 minutes to get from my house to the school. I would get picked up at 6:40 a.m. every morning to be there in time for 8:30 school.
That is nuts.
That is nuts. But everybody, it was all consolidated. And because I lived almost out at the very end, almost at the very end of the peninsula, and they had all the junior high students on the peninsula in one school, it was like crazy. But the bus ride was not so bad. I knew a lot of the kids. A lot of the kids were friends. And from the time they picked us up until we got to the high school, we were always like squished because the high school kids would ride with us too, and then they'd let them off and we'd have another 10 minutes before we got to our school. The radio would always be playing on the bus, and they always played 2 songs that everybody ended up singing along with. You have your little group of friends, like my little group of friends, or you could have the whole bus, depending on what, which bus driver you had. And ours was a cool lady. She was wicked fun. And she knew all the kids, and she knew that if the good music was on the radio, they'd stay calm and have fun and not be crazy. And it worked. And so she'd let us do stuff. And the 2 songs that were playing the most at that time, when I remember them when we were singing along to, were Kiss, Rock and Roll All Night, and Black Water by the Doobie Brothers. These are the two songs that I learned. I had to learn all the lyrics of in order to sing along with it with everybody else. And I was in 7th grade, man. This is going, way back. It was a lot of fun. The music was great. The memories were great. It made getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning a lot more bearable to go to school. And there were other great songs at the time, too, but those two, they always seemed to bring out the best in everybody on the bus. You'd start singing that end part of Black Water by the Doobie Brothers, and the whole bus would be ringing with that. And you got all these kids between 12 and 16 years of age.
Kind of cool.
It was very cool, and it's one of those few memories I have from that time that are really, really kind of funky. Number 6, tie, Kiss's Rock and Roll All Night, and Black Water by the Doobie Brothers.
Okay.
Screams 70s school bus to me.
Number 5 for me is, this one might kind of surprise some people, because it's not, I've actually never mentioned this with you, I don't think. My number 5 is Bad Bad Leroy Brown from Jim Croce.
That's a great iconic song.
Yeah. The story of a big tough guy that's respected and feared until he meets somebody bigger than him. It's just one of those songs that if you asked me if you asked me to name a singer from the 70s, my mind would instantly go to Jim Croce. Because he had this voice that just, to me, is so 70s. I just picture him in my mind with that mop of curly hair and that mustache and that voice that could be melodious and sad in a song like Time in a Bottle, which is so sad and wistful. And then you have a song like this that's a lot more sassy and funky. And it's just one of those songs that I just remember. And if you asked me to sing a line from it, if my voice didn't sound like I just swallowed a cheese grater, I could probably do it.
Yeah.
And you'd probably have to shut me up because I'd keep going.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those songs that you just, once you start singing it, you really just can't quit.
Yeah.
So my number 5, Bad Bad Leroy Brown from the late, great Jim Croce.
We lost him way too young. He was only 30, and that was on the radio, actually, at the time he died. He was just really, it was his biggest hit. My number 5, you're not going to be surprised to find this on here. And I don't think anybody else will be either. It's the oldest song on the entire list, and it's like, to me, 70s is the time I grew up. I was born in the 60s, but I spent my formative years in the 1970s. And for me, one of the happiest memories I ever had was Christmas 1970. That Christmas was really ultra cool because we had just gotten a house, this great big Christmas tree, and I wasn't asking for much for my, from Santa Claus at the time, and the one thing I wanted more than anything was an album. And I'm like, I want to get this from, Santa or mom and dad or mom and stepdad at the time. And not only did I get that album, I got an amplifier, a microphone, a set of drums from my aunt and uncle that year, all that year. I've never played the drums, but the microphone and the amplifier, Mom and Frank were so stunned at how happy my reaction was. As much as I enjoyed that, and I've been a ham at microphones ever since, the album was the important thing, and I remember freaking out when I got it. Because it was the number 1 show for kids on TV at the time, and everybody loved it, and it was all, the first single was all over the radio, a number 1 hit. Number 5 on my list, harken back to the late 1970, and I Think I Love You by the Partridge Family. There goes her face. It's a
Kermit bitch face.
It's a sappy little song that was a number 1 hit because the show was a hit, and everybody was watching it. Everybody was talking about it. I love the music, and it's part of my childhood. So sue me.
I think fine.
Number 5. I always think back to that house in Utica, Ohio, and Christmas when I hear I Think I Love You by the Partridge Family.
Okay. This one is going to completely blow your mind. I know it is.
Okay. We'll see.
My number 4 is a song that if you think of the 70s and you think of the idea that the music of the 70s was when the 60s were when things really started to change. You had acid rock and psychedelica and all this stuff like that. And then the 70s, you had, the advent of disco, and you had the whole idea of people taking something old and turning it into something completely new and out there and different. And I don't think anything could be any older than classical music. My number 4 is Walter Murphy's A Fifth of Beethoven.
Yeah? Okay, yeah, I did not expect that one.
I knew kids who could skate
he just Freeway Jem uses that on one of his things.
I knew kids who could skate to that. I mean, actually skate and not kill themselves.
Jam skate? Like dance skate?
Jam skate. I knew kids who could ice skate, to it. And not kill themselves. And I was always envious of those guys because they could just do this. And this song, obviously, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is something that I think probably aliens have probably heard it because it's probably been beamed out into outer space like 90 kabillion times. But this kind of disco version of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is so weird and so strange and so 1970s. It really could not have come out of any other era. I really don't think it could have.
Well, you have to explain something. When disco first started, I'm speaking from personal experience, the early first couple of years of disco were a lot of studio orchestras remaking big band songs with a disco beat. There was Tangerine, Babyface, Brazil, all big hits again by different studio bands, and Walter Murphy did it with classical music.
Right.
And that wasn't the only one he did. He also did Flight of the Bumblebee.
Right. Also known as the theme to the Green Hornet.
Well, that version is, yeah.
But A Fifth of Beethoven, like I said, it's just one of those songs. It could not have come out of any other decade other than the 70s. So my number 4, A Fifth of Beethoven of Walter Murphy.
Who is now scoring a lot of TV sitcoms. That's great. I love that. Hooked on Classics would take another 5 years before it came out, and that was another big hit. Number 4, there was no question that this artist had to be on the list. The question was, which song? Because there's so many great songs, and let's face it, they are just my all-time favorite music act. There is nobody, as I love Hanson, they're my boys, I love Def Leppard, but nobody can even hope to, come even close.
No one can eclipse in your heart
the sound of Karen Carpenter's voice. I have been a Carpenters fan since day one. I was 5 or 6 when they had their first big hit. The question was, which song evokes 70s more than anything to me? Because they're all 70s. I mean, all their biggest hits came in the 70s. They had a couple in the early 80s, but... and this one, I picked this one because it was on the radio at the time in the 1970s when I had a paper route. My mother would drive me around every night, and we would hit in the little town of Harrington. We would, bring the papers to the 50 or 60 people that subscribed to it every day. And I'd jump in the car after school, grab my jerky and my soda and the papers, pick up the papers, and we'd go off and deliver them. And KJRB in Spokane, AM 790 on your radio dial, was the top 40 station, and they were playing all these songs and this really oddball song by the Carpenters. Nobody ever expected this to become a hit. And yet, it didn't become as big a hit here in the States as it did everywhere else. It hit number 1 in Ireland. It was a top 10 hit in Japan. Bigger hit in Canada than it was in the States. But it's still, despite the fact that it wasn't their original, some of their hits were written by Richard, but a lot of them are actually covers. They've actually recorded other artists. And this was one of them, and it had become popular the year before by a Canadian rock band called Klaatu. And nobody could ever imagine that one of Klaatu's hits would become a signature song for Karen and Richard Carpenter, but calling occupants of interplanetary craft did. It's so 70s. It came from their experimental album Passage, and it was... People were listening to this going like, what the hell is this? This was not your, please, Mr. Postman,
Which I think
close
was
to
the
you.
first Karen Carpenter. Well, I think that was the first Carpenter song I ever heard.
And it's like, this isn't anything like they've done ever before. And yet, it was one of the best, and it is still, according to Richard, who is still out there, it's still one of the 5 or 6 songs that he gets the most requests for when they're talking about playing the old music. And considering it peaked at number 34 on the pop chart here in America, but I have that memory of it being on every day when I was doing my paper route and just thinking to this. And as much as I love 2 or 3 other songs by them, and Only Yesterday is my ultimate favorite by them, this really is the one that I remember, and it always screams 70s to me, as long as most Carpenter's music would, but that one especially. Number 4, Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft.
Okay.
The long version of which is on the Spotify playlist. So you get to hear the whole thing from passage. It's 7 minutes long. It's awesome.
Okay. My number 3 is a person that I've talked numerous times about on other shows that we've done because they have been a big part of my life. And this is the song that I think of when I think of this person, one of the songs. My number 3 is School's Out from Alice Cooper.
I was wondering if we were going to get to some of the stuff that you knew from rock.
The first time I think I ever really heard this song was on The Muppet Show. They had Alice Cooper as a guest on The Muppet Show, and he was singing School's Out with some of the really big Muppet monsters, and he was just being Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
He was... And this song was all about rebellion and being free and stuff like that. And I just remember sitting there, and it was like something inside me woke up. It was like something flipped a switch.
It was when she turned into the metal monster she now is.
It was just, I want to do this. I want to be like him. I want to be outrageous. I want to be crazy. I want to say whatever I want. And I want people to love me for it.
It's a good thing you didn't become exactly like him, because I'd never see you. You'd be out on the golf course 90% of the time anymore. What Alice does these days. Golf.
The song's been covered by everybody and their dog, but I don't think anyone can do that song like Alice. It's just so 70s and so him and just so perfect. Mm-hmm. My number 3, School's Out.
I just
from
thought of
Alice
another one I
Cooper.
completely missed and I should have had on the list, but
Okay,
it's too late now. My number 3, I'm going to tell you guys, if you know me, then you already know I've revealed it at some point. This is my all-time favorite song. And there's something, everybody in their life has something magical about the way they think about one particular time in their life.
Right.
For me, it was the summer of 1978. Number 1, it was the best year for music in my lifetime. And I'm not the only one that thinks that. When you think that several major artists from the 70s have gone back and done cover albums of music all from the summer of 1978. Mm-hmm. That's really something. There was, you had disco on the chart with Andy Gibb and the Bee Gees. You had rock music with Wings. You had pop stuff from the Carpenters. You had middle of the road stuff from Captain Tennille. Even Christy and Jimmy McNichol got into it, and Jane Oliver. And you had the one song that, to me, I don't know what it is about this song that just, it's been there. It is a padlock shape in my heart, and it keeps it right there, and it always will be there for the rest of my life. There is just something about the song that's magical to me. Number 3, Jerry Rafferty's Baker Street. Mm-hmm. It brings back memories of the summer of 78. It reminds me a lot of traveling in the car with my mom and the lady I used to refer to as Grandma Tut-Tut when I was a kid, as we drove up into British Columbia for a vacation to see what's now long gone, Bedrock City. It was a Flintstones thing. and traveling through Canada for the first time, and it was fun, and hearing all this great music, and that song was on the radio, and I don't know what it is about Jerry Rafferty's Baker Street. It made me an immense fan of him, and we lost him a few years ago, again, way too young, and just loved his stuff. I liked his early stuff with Steelers Wheel, too. I mean, Stuck in the Middle with You was him, and all this, but his solo stuff remains high on my list, and if you've never heard any of it, City to City is where to start. It was his #1 album that produced his #1 hit, Baker Street, 1978. Summertime, and number 3 from me.
Number 2 will surprise absolutely nobody who knows me. Although, to be honest, I wasn't... Well, the first time I saw them, I was like, what is this? My number 2 is Rock and Roll All Night by Kiss.
Oh my God, we did match on a song. Yay! I kind of figured it would be this one, too.
The first time I ever saw Kiss, I was like, what is that? You know, I couldn't quite figure out what it was, and I was like...
It wasn't quite Alice Cooper.
No, but I was just like, I almost was like, are they even real? You know, I was like, is this a show? Is this, I mean, I was old enough at that point to know that there was fantasy and reality and, you know, that kind of a thing. But, you know, I got into the Kiss mystique and the whole, you know, that they never took their makeup off, they were never seen in public without their makeup and all that stuff like that. And, I mean, I was definitely not at an age where I was starting to, you know, have romantic feelings about anybody, you know, much less those guys. But, you know,
yeah. I
just remember listening to the lyrics to Rock and Roll All Night and being like, is that what it means to be a teenager? To be, you know, that you can party all the time and you can do whatever you want. You can, you know, I was like, yeah. You know, this sounds great. You know, when is this gonna? You know, when is this gonna happen?
That has now been usurped by Andrew WK. By the way.
Yeah, I know. Of course, by the time I was a teenager, I was a walking ball of angst, daddy issues, self-loathing, and hair. So I wasn't really, you know, in the rock and roll all night party every day category as much as I wanted to have been.
Right. Yeah.
If I hadn't been so painfully shy in high school, I would have been a mega slut. But I was. So anyway, but this obviously was much before high school. And I just remember hearing Rock and Roll All Night and listening and hearing the guitar. The guitar was what got me with Rock and Roll All Night. That da-na-na-da-da-na-na at the beginning. And I just remember being like, what is this?
It's called heavy metal, dear.
Yeah, this was nothing my parents were playing. You know, and I just remember being like, is this what teenagers get to listen to? Is this what grown-ups listen to when we go to bed? You know,
no, they listen to Tony Bennett and stuff like that still.
I know.
Yeah.
Because your parents are squares.
Yeah.
You know. My parents were very square. Sorry, Mom.
My mom was cool, but not
my
that
number
cool.
2, Rock and Roll All Night by Kiss, of course.
My number 2, this definitely brings up the fall of 1977 because when you hear this song, you instantly think of the film's opening. And it was just like one of the biggest hits. You must see movies, Oscar nominee later, and it was just the most successful soundtrack of all time, and everything came out of it that became what music would be for the next 2 years came out of this movie, including The Fifth of Beethoven was also on the soundtrack of that movie, although not originally, it was licensed. But when you hear this song, you see John Travolta strutting down the street in Brooklyn, carrying a can of paint with that ridiculous short hair of his, and the beginning of Saturday Night Fever. My number 2 song, Stayin' Alive by the Bee Gees. There's just nothing you can, when you hear that song, it brings that to mind. That image is so iconic, especially to movie fans, even though I've never been a huge fan of the film.
No, I saw the film much later in a re-release with my mom, of all people.
Back when it became a PG, when they edited some of it out, or when it was still an R-rated film?
I don't know.
I saw it when it was rated R, and I wasn't that thrilled with it.
I was too young to really pay attention to ratings then. So, and I can't see my mom taking me to an R-rated movie.
Right, so it must have been a PG. The PG.
But I just remember thinking, this is boring.
Yeah, it's not. I know people loved it, but I didn't think. I mean, the music, the dancing sequences are phenomenal.
The soundtrack is great.
And the soundtrack, awesome.
The plot is just. I don't care about any of these people. I'm sorry, I don't.
But you can't forget that image. You can't forget that image, and it's just like it was, and it is what made. I mean, the Bee Gees had already started a big comeback, but that movie cemented it. They could do no wrong for the next 3 years. My number 2, "Staying Alive" by the Bee Gees from 1977, fall and early 1978. Again, in that same time period.
Okay. My number 1 for me, this is the 70s to me. If you said, what is something that sums up the 70s for you? To me, this sums up the whole decade. It's not just, this is something that is 1 year. This is something that sums up the only thing that mattered in the 1970s for me. And the minute I hear this music, I am transported back in time to being a little girl in the Saugus General Cinema, sitting in my chair, wondering what's going to happen, and seeing a dark screen, and then the words come up, "A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away." And then just getting hit with this tidal wave of music that just smashes into you, and literally had my skin crawling with goosebumps, and sitting there as this small child going, "This is important. This is defining me."
Well, anyone who's not surprised by this, I'm going to be really surprised.
My number 1, the theme to Star Wars by John Williams.
You asked me about this, and I told you it was a top 10 hit, along with Miko's version that hit number 1. It hit number 10 on the Billboard Pop charts, so it was a legitimate hit.
Yeah.
Summer of 77.
It was just, it was just something that was so special and so resonating. It just resonated inside of my body that it was like, this is important. I literally felt like somebody had grabbed me by the face and was holding me and making me feel like, you need to watch this. You need to pay attention to this. You need to absorb this into every single pore of your body, because this is who you are. And that music is part of what got me there.
Yeah.
So my number 1, the theme to Star Wars by John Williams.
You're always so melodramatic.
Yes, I am. There are certain things I will be melodramatic about. There are certain things I will fight people over, and Star Wars is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Deal.
My number 1 is one of those songs that no matter where you are and where you hear it, I instantly think of the 1970s, because it's from the 70s. It's quintessential 70s. It's from the band that became representation of quintessential 70s. And everybody knows it. The minute you hear it on a commercial, in another movie, on the radio, in the Broadway show, it's just like, okay, this song is going to be part of your life forever. The number 1 most iconic song from the 1970s for me is "Dancing Queen" by ABBA.
Okay.
Whether it's from Mamma Mia, the musical, or on commercials, or in the videos, or just hearing it on the radio, you instantly think of the 1970s, where ABBA is singing the song and you hear it on the radio all the time. For me, it's the summer of 1976, and watching the cheerleaders do a routine to this at school, and enjoying every second of it. It just screams 1970. Everything about ABBA screams 1970 for one thing.
Well, yeah.
Although they had a few hits in the 80s, like the Carpenters, most of their hits came in the 70s. And they're the only major act to have major success in the U.S. that came out of Eurovision. And it's like, they're just really no other 70s theme for me that could possibly bringing the 70s to mind quicker than Dancing Queen by ABBA.
That's a fantastic choice.
I'm really surprised it wasn't on your top 10.
It was almost there.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty, so let's run them down again. What's your top 10?
Sorry, I had to take a quick drink.
Yep.
My top 10, number 10, You're So Vain, Carly Simon. Number 9, I Will Survive, Gloria Gaynor. Number 8, Hot Stuff, Donna Summer. Number 7, Sarah Smile, Hall & Oates. Number 6, Superstition, Stevie Wonder. Number 5, Bad Bad, Leroy Brown, Jim Croce. Number 4, A Fifth of Beethoven, Walter Murphy. Number 3, School's Out, Alice Cooper. Number 2, Rock and Roll All Night, Kiss. And number 1, the theme to Star Wars, John Williams.
I'm surprised Dream On isn't on your list.
It
came close to mine, too.
I didn't hear that until the 80s.
The 80s, so you think of the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Because a lot of the Aerosmith stuff really got popular again in the 80s because they took off again in the 80s.
Right.
My top 10, just the top 10. Number 10, Hooked on a Feeling, Blue Swede. Number 9, Benny and the Jets, Elton John, unfortunately. Number 8, More, The Andrea True Connection. Number 7, Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. Number 6, Rock and Roll All Night by The Kiss and Blackwater by the Dewey Brothers, a tie. Number 5, I Think I Love You by the Partridge Family. Number 4, Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft by Carpenters. Number 3, Baker Street by Jerry Rafferty. Number 2, Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. And number 1, Dancing Queen by ABBA. There's also some great, if you've never heard Klaatu's version of Calling Occupants, you should listen to it. It's a great.
I'm not trying to be rude, but until I met you, I never heard the Carpenters version of Calling Occupants. To be perfectly honest with you.
Well, that's just a shame. You poor thing. You were just so bereft of this great music for years.
I guess.
How did you ever survive?
Oh, I found ways.
So we normally would plug our next list here, but we're not going to have another show till September on this show. Instead, this Thursday, God willing and illness not giving us any more problems, we will debut our summer replacement show, Subject Cinema's Real Recipe. This is going to be a food and movies oriented show.
Yep.
We're going to look at movies that are centered around food. We're going to talk about recipes. Eric and his brood, Eric Lyon, Valerie Lyon, and their Lyon family will be contributing off and on with their Cavebabble Eats Odd Things re-edits for us. And Anthony may get involved too, Anthony Limberti from Comic Grotto. Mm-hmm. And we will also be talking about television shows, cooking shows, all kinds of stuff, all related to food and entertainment.
Yep.
Because I actually brought this up to Eric back in January. And Eric said to me, Valerie and I were thinking about doing something like that too. And I said, well, why don't we get it together? You guys can do the Cavebabble Eats Odd Things thing and shoot it over to us and we can play it on the show. And he's like, that's a great idea. So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And it's going to be fun because their Eats Odd Things segments are hilarious. If you've never heard them, you should be listening to Cavebabble anyway at cavebabble.com. But if you haven't heard those segments, they are a riot. Because they're just completely, usually unexpurgated, and some of the stuff they've tried are just, I don't know where Amber was coming up with some of that stuff a few years ago, all this Japanese stuff she was ordering from Amazon. And it's like, yeah, this is not for the American palates. This is definitely Japanese palate. But it's like, oh. So anyway, the Real Recipe premieres hopefully this Thursday, if we're on time.
Yep.
And we have other shows coming up. Of course, we have our mini shows. Tuesday, Digidex every Tuesday and 3-Minute Weekend every Friday, running down the latest releases, home video on Tuesday and theaters on Friday. We have Subject Cinema's Drive-In Summer, all summer long on Sundays. We will be back after 2 weeks off because of illness this coming week, and we'll be talking about current movies, drive-in movies, all kinds of stuff, all devoted to the drive-in, and we hope that you'll join us for that too. And that's brought to you by Going Attractions, the definitive story of the American drive-in from director April Wright.
Terrific movie.
It is. And driveins.com, your one-stop shop for all things drive-in at drive-ins.com. And we will also have a few other things coming up in the next few weeks. You're going to do a couple of Platinum Roses Garden specials this summer.
Platinum Roses Garden is on hiatus right now, my Supernatural podcast, because the show is not
it's summer season
hiatus right now. But I will be doing some shows later on in the summer, looking at fan fiction and bringing up certain authors and stories that I think you should check out, not only from Supernatural, but from other genres as well.
And our latest addition to the PNR Networks family is already getting all kinds of buzz and lots of downloads. It's Comic Grotto with Aunt B and Pee-wee at comicgrotto.com. It's all about comics. They're centering their discussions on separate comics, groups of comics, and everything else, and it's already got a following building, and those two are great anyway, and the show is terrific, and you should check it out at comicgrotto.com. We also have stuff coming up all the time on our websites, eCinemaOne, eCinemaBoston, and I am going to catch up this coming week. I finally sat down and got some ideas for our flashback website, which is called Planet BiblioMusica, where Kim and I talk about old music, old books, bookstores, and the places we used to love to haunt as teenagers and young adults.
Yep. And
it's a nostalgia site with fun and humor thrown into, and we hope you'll come check it out at planetbm.pnrnetworks.com. And we'll have some new photos up from our trip last year and a few other things in the next week or so. Plus all kinds of good stuff. You never know what we're going to have, and we hope that you will take the time to donate at our Patreon campaign. I feel like I'm talking to thin air whenever I bring this up. But, it would really help us out because we need some new equipment and we really could use your help. Take time to donate a little bit. $2 a month is all it takes, and we hope that you'll join us at patreon.com/PNR Networks.
We really do.
I hope to see you tomorrow, as we're recording this, Wednesday, with a new Catastrophe Vortex. I'm not sure we're going to get there, but hopefully we will. If not, it'll be this weekend, and we'll be back on Thursday with the premiere of The Real Recipe.
Yep.
Until we return in the fall with Front Row 5 and 10, when you'll see this show again. I'm T.C. Kirkham.
I'm Kim Brown. And we hope we can count on you to help us count up the shows we've had this summer, and you'll go and check them all out.
Check out our Spotify playlist of all the songs this week. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
You've been listening to Front Row 5 and 10 with Kim Brown and T.C. Kirkham.
Podcasting's choice. From coast to coast, continent to continent, right here 24/7.
PNR.